I was walking along the road and looked over and saw someone under a streaming parachute. I remember calling out, pull your reserve, but that was her reserve. She'd already done a cutaway and now had a streamering reserve. When we got there, Joan was on the ground, pushed into the ground a bit. I did the mouth-to-mouth resuscitation before the emergency helicopter showed up, and the EMT guys were able to come up, and they declared her at the spot.
At 5:30 a.m. on July 28th, my wife and I and our film crew left our homes in Redmond, Washington. 10 hours later, we arrived in Lost Prairie, Montana. An oasis nestled deep in the wilderness about 50 miles west of Kalispell, Lost Prairie resembles an ancient Kootenai village and is a beehive of skydiving activity, characters, and community. During the course of the next 3 days, we would get some spellbinding interviews, stunning footage, and get to know some of the people whose passion for skydiving has bonded them into a family for more than 30 years. Joan Carson helped found Lost Prairie. Her dream was to live amongst fellow skydivers. Unfortunately, her time was cut short, but her legacy lives on.
8 slots available on load 1, 8 slots available.
Today, Joan's dream has grown into a thriving enterprise and a tight-knit community of skydivers, some of whom still live side by side, along with many others who return year after year for the annual week-long boogie.
In case Kim goes low because she's so heavy, you can use her that can move up.
Morning, everybody. Rob and Erica were really hoping we could get somebody to donate us a necktie. The uglier the better. It's for a tie jump. Anybody got a tie that we can have?
When the first boogie started at Lost Prairie, they would attract about 60 skydivers who would jump out of single-engine Cessnas. Today, they draw 300 to 500 skydivers from all over the world who jump out of de Havilland Twin Otters. Unbeknownst to us, 2 hours before we arrived in Lost Prairie, there had been a skydiving fatality. It goes without saying that nobody wanted to be interviewed by a film crew. We finally learned of the tragedy and wished that someone had told us sooner.
Traffic 94 Mike Delta is a Twin Otter, turn left base, landing runway 32, full stop, Carsfield.
We couldn't get over the irony that we'd come to Lost Prairie to make a film about Joan Carson, who had died on the same field almost 30 years earlier. And then 2 hours before we arrived, there's another skydiving fatality. It was surreal, made even more so by the fact that it was only the third skydiving fatality to occur there since Joan helped found Lost Prairie. Later that day, we began our interviews, not only to learn more about Joan, but also to learn more about why people skydive and the sport.
Full name is Richard Stanky, but most people call me Stinky. So I go by Dick, and I say, you can call me Stinky, you can call me Dick, but don't call me Stinky Dick.
Okay, real name is Richard Zimmerman, and currently I'm living in Lincoln, California. And my AKA, also known as, is Zimmo.
My full name is Fred Sand. I live right here at Lost Prairie. Born in Kalispell, just about 30 miles away. Lived in this area all my life. And since I was 19 years old, I've been a skydiver.
I started May 23rd, 1971.
What made you want to skydive?
It's like the first time you remember that your first sex you had, it's kind of like that. You remember that too.
We won't talk about that. So was it like that?
Better.
Better.
Way better.
It started in 1974. And I had a little bit of an attitude, and this is a little bit of a sad story, but I lost my son a couple of years earlier in an accident, not a car accident. He fell down some stairs and had a brain hemorrhage that couldn't stop. And then after that, I was just like I didn't care anymore. And I was also majoring in psychology, and I'd heard that some of these psychologists were telling people with suicidal tendencies to go skydiving because every time you pull the ripcord, you reinforce the idea that you really don't want to die. I thought, hey, I'm going to try that because I've always wanted to go skydiving. I did it, and I loved it, and before long, the last thing in the world I wanted to do was die.
What kept me interested in the sport was the challenge of it, of learning the sport. It was also very interesting in learning about myself and my capabilities and what I could do to expand my own horizons. I thought if I could jump out of an airplane, I can do anything.
And here comes this guy. He was a summer student out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, named Steve Armitage, Armo, who is a jumper in Beagle or became a jumper in Beagle. And we were partying together. Nobody else was there because the summer people weren't there, and this was April. And he said, I really want to skydive, you know. And I said, I know just the place to go.
I got out there and I told myself, if I live through this, I am never going to do this again. But when I got to the ground and I watched everyone else doing it that were regulars, I thought, man, if they can do it, I can do it too. You know, I can do the stuff they're doing. So I just kept going and going and going, and got better and better and better at it, and enjoyed it more and more, and to the point where I was not afraid at all. In fact, I was probably getting to the point where I was dangerous because I just had no fear at all.
There have been numerous times, probably as a guess, 25 or 30 times when the main parachute failed to deploy properly, and I did have to use my reserve. And that's part of the game. Or that's why you, not only for common sense and rules and regulations, but that's why you take two parachutes, so that just in case.
I was just learning to pull my own ripcord, and my jump master was Bob Jones, and I jumped out of the plane, and I did an arch. I rolled over on my back. I went, oh, crap! I got to pull this ripcord. I pulled it, and I watched the parachute come up between my legs, wrap around one leg 3 times, came up, wrapped around my left arm. All the lines went out. I had what's called, in today's standards, it's called a horseshoe malfunction, because if you're standing on the ground and you see somebody that's having this problem, you see a person, but you see what looks like a horseshoe, and that's the parachute and lines and everything above them. Well, normally you want to get rid of all that stuff, because if you pull a reserve, there's a high risk of the reserve entangling in it, and then, of course, you're going to get killed. But there's no way to get rid of a horseshoe. It's tangled on you. So I went ahead and pulled the reserve, and the reserve came out and hit the horseshoe. Half the reserve went up one side of the horseshoe, half went up the other, and it looked like it was going to tangle, when suddenly it just slipped off, inflated, and then all the stuff just rained down on me, all the garbage. But I had a parachute above me. And I landed, and of course my heart was doing this, and Bob Jones came up to me, my jump master, and he goes, man, I didn't think you were going to make it. I didn't think you were going to make it. And he goes, I'm never jump mastering again. And he never did. I was his last student. It scared him that bad, you know.
I met Joan Carson down in the Medford, Oregon area, 1976 or so, in the winter. Because things were slow here in northwest Montana for skydiving, we, as a group, sort of decided to take a little bit of a tour or some time off and go south to skydive. And one of the locations was down in Medford. Joan was there, and we grew as friends there, made some jumps together, and that's when I did meet Joan.
Joni was really, really unique. We both started at about the same time in 1974, I think it was, in Medford, Oregon, at Beagle Sky Ranch, a dirt strip airport. And she was just really a fun person, and we got to closer and closer. And you know, as time goes by, you're skydiving so much. And when you're skydiving, I'm putting my life in your hands. You're putting your life in my hands. You bond. You know, it's just bonding. I remember one time we were talking, and she goes, "I want to be a wing walker." And I said, "Really?" She goes, "Yeah, I go out there. I won't even wear a parachute, and I'll go wing walking." And I said, "Joni, you can't just go out wing walking without getting the whole routine down. You got to wear a parachute." "I don't need a parachute. I wouldn't fall off." She goes, "One of these days, though, I'm gonna go out and do some wing walking." And I said, "Okay, Joni." That's how that was her mindset, her thoughts, you know. On one jump, they're doing the Beagle Boogie Babe thing, and there's Joan Carson, Bonnie Young, I can't remember who the other ones were. They all tracked away from each other. They all opened their parachutes at the same time. And the next thing I know, I see two people cut away from their main parachutes, go into free fall, and open up the reserve parachutes. Absolutely everything done simultaneously. I mean, it was choreographed. It was like a ballet.
The jumps that I made with Joan, they were usually in groups of 3 or 4 people, so it'd be her and I and a couple other jumpers, and it was just the enjoyment of jumping with friends. And as far as anything spectacular, nothing specific, but just the fact that we were there sharing the day and the experience together. I guess that is important. So
we didn't know them, they didn't know us, but for some reason, you're automatically community, you're automatically family. It only took a few skydives, and we were all family, you know. We were helping them out. We gave them, you know, our apartments, shared our apartments with them. Before long, they go, "You know, we're going to get an apartment right here in the same building because we're going to stay." They get an apartment. Well, every night you get home from work, guess what you do? You all get together and head off to do something, the whole group of you know? So it's a real family. It turns into a family, you know? And we're subculture. We're a family, you know?
I gotta go now, I've gotta go now, I've gotta go now, right away. I've gotta go now, I've gotta go now, I've gotta go now, right away. I've got to go now, gotta go now, yeah. I've got to go now, gotta go now, yeah.
The Beagle Boogie Babes, and there's also the Beagle Boogie Boys, really got their name because the airport where we were was Beagle Sky Ranch. And Boogie has a connection as far as going out and doing an event together.
We built the first 10-man round star in Southern Oregon, and I think it was in like 1977 or something. And it was because of Joni that we were able to pull it off. She was wearing a reserve on her back this is way old gear, way back when, on her back that was right below her neck. We were jumping out a very small door, beach 18, I think it was, whatever. It was a real small door. Every time we tried this before, people would all come in and we'd end up tumbling and falling on each other. It was what's called a funnel, where you get sucked in like the person in front of you is a vacuum cleaner. They're cutting a hole through the sky. Well, we didn't realize it, but we were all getting there at the same time. So we were creating so much turbulence and burble that's why we couldn't build this 10-man star. And it was dangerous, you know? So on this one jump, Joni hit her a reserve on the top of the door, and that held up everybody, which actually let the base build, the first few build, stabilize it. The next came because they had to wait for her to get out before they could get out. And so it built slowly, and we built the first 10-man star in Southern Oregon. And I believe that's the same jump when we got down, and Joni goes, "Wow, I'm sorry, you guys." I said, "No, that's what we need to do from now on is slow it down, and we'll be able to pull this sort of thing off." Well, she opened up where her reserve was, opened up, and she had pins through cones that had been bent, which means her reserve was worthless on that jump. If she needed a reserve on that jump, she wouldn't have had one. And that was the first 10-man star in Southern Oregon.
As far as what might have attracted Joan to skydiving, I guess I never did ask her that question, but I would think similar to what a lot of people say is just the challenge of it and wanting to do something that maybe is a little bit out of the ordinary.
Oh, I think Joni was drawn to skydiving. Probably, I don't know if it was depression or boredom or maybe a combination of both. In fact, I think it was a combination of both. I think she felt like her life wasn't going as fast or as big as she wanted it to go. And she was going to do something that most people don't do. And if she got into it and got good at it, she was going to do something that nobody's ever done. And I think that was her drive and that was her spirit. You weren't going to put her down, and she wasn't going to waste her life. She was going to do something really special with it. And she did, I think.
Joan might have, I won't say accident prone, but Joan did have times when she was injured skydiving and other activities as well. It didn't really keep her down. I think she wanted to carry on and keep going. So even with the minor setbacks of a ankle or a wrist injury, it might have slowed her down momentarily, but not in spirit at all.
It's no more than a skier falls down and breaks a wrist or a leg or whatever, the same things. They just affect us later on in life, which we didn't really care about at that age. But yeah, no different than that.
Oh, I don't think she was a real limit pusher. Joan approached skydiving with a very good common sense approach, and I think she would go more toward being conservative than taking on other things that might be a little bit more on the risk side of things. Very conservative.
She was spontaneous, but she was always kind of quiet and reserved, but willing to try anything, and I mean anything, which made her kind of like she was two personalities. There's the quiet, calm Joni, and let's go raise hell Joni.
Well, she was very, very pleasant to be around, bubbly, lots of energy there. So Joan's personality was very, very easy to get along with.
She was just like one of us, She fit right in, and you thought she'd been with us forever, Jovial, always smiling about something. Never had a bad thing to say about anybody.
It would have been in May when things started getting a little bit better in Montana when we decided to come back up in this direction. And Joan had made the decision to come up and spend some time in Montana with us.
She was going to go with the Montana guys and hang out in Montana,
We sent one girl down because she was unemployed at the time with these guys, and Armo kind of took a liking to her, and Fred and Dave took a liking to Joni, and Fred took a liking to this other gal from there. And in the spring, we left Debra, who is Armo's wife now, Debbie Kilmaca was her name, and Joan and Ann ended up coming back to Kalispell. So they just did kind of a flip-flop with the women.
I think we made Dave buy us a six-pack of beer. We were laughing that we sold Joni and got a whole six-pack of beer for her. So
she owned a motorhome, a little Tioga motorhome, 20-footer, 22-footer, 24, something like that. And we were jumping out of the city airport in Kalispell, and we had a hangar there, the club rented, which was a little office and packing area and stuff. And she parked it outside there and got a job and started skydiving with us. And been at Lost Ferry, was one of the original owners since 1980. One of the original 5 people, which Joan was one of. She was getting on in life, and she was deciding what she had a good job back then. She was working up the aluminum plant and making good money, and she always had a job and always made money. And she didn't really care what she did, but she was looking into her future, and it was here with the rest of us. And so I spent a lot of time with her on there, figuring out how to divide her land, where would be the best spots. And she actually drilled a well in preparation for where she's going to put her house. And at that time, over at the lake, over here at McGregor Lake, they had a bunch of cabins for sale one summer, and she bought one, and we moved that up there, and that was going to be the start of it.
When she did make her last jump, it was on a Memorial weekend gathering, and yes, I was here.
I got the phone call, and I was devastated. you know, I lost a sister. It's like losing your own sister, you know.
We'd probably had this property a year and a half.
From what we were able to determine as far as the causes why Joan had the problem on her last jump is there was a minor problem with the equipment that she was using, and it developed into a situation where the parachute just didn't inflate properly and was useless to her.
I was told that she had borrowed a parachute, and borrowing any gear anytime you're skydiving is kind of always has an extra risk because you're not familiar with the gear. But at any rate, she had a problem with her main parachute, and she released it like you should, and pulled a reserve. And for reasons I'm not 100% sure about, the reserve would not come out of the bag it's in, and she just went 120 miles an hour into the ground, and that's, you know, that's the way it went.
Well, when Joan died, obviously, it was very, very close to all of our hearts. It wasn't to the point where people said, well, if it could happen to Joan, it could happen to me, and people would stop jumping. Just to keep the spirit of skydiving, not only with the Beagle Boogie people, as well as the jumpers here at Lost Prairie, we carried on. You know, we'd go make a jump because that's what Joan would want us to do.
There's risk and reward, and you have to figure out what it is you want to get out of life, you know?
A lot of them said, you know, if they're going to die, that'd be one way to go, you know. So, you know, it's like anything else. They take the chance, you know. But they know it's very minimal, too. So I guess when it's your time, you know, like they say.
You can't pack your own reserve unless you're a licensed rigger, which means you have to go to school and get rated by the FAA to pack pilot's rigs and sport parachutists, emergency parachute, the reserve. And you just have to do that because you can't have a guy that may not understand what he's looking at packing it, because this is a life-saving device now. We're not having fun when we start using this. We're trying to save our lives. So it makes sense that, yeah, you want somebody that understands every aspect of what's going on, whether it's worn, whether this is worn, this needs to be replaced, everything, or there's a safety issue about your particular rig. Other people are reporting this problem. You don't know that. He does. He's getting the bulletins all the time in the mail and everything. So yeah, you got to have a license rigger to do it.
Know what it is, makes me feel so fine. Me and my girl and a bottle of wine. Without my lady, said sun don't shine. Gonna love her till I make her mine.
Over the course of 3 days, we learned more about skydiving than we ever thought possible, and discovered some things about Joan I hadn't known. We wanted to learn more about her and Lost Prairie, but we needed to get home. We vowed to return to Lost Prairie soon, and would do so on our next road trip. About 5 p.m., we pulled out of Lost Prairie and headed west for the long drive to Seattle. As promised, we returned to Lost Prairie on our next road trip, which would also include Medford and San Francisco. We arrived as the sun was setting on a deserted drop zone. Where there had once been a buzz of activity, sound of planes, skydiving, and drinking, there was now the chirp of crickets and wind in the pines. I couldn't get over the contrast from our first visit. It now seemed so lonely and desolate, and didn't fit with the Joan I had known in Redmond and San Francisco. The following day, we resumed our interviews, wanting to learn more about Joan and the place she had helped create.
Sam Scott, Kalispell, Montana.
My name is Bill Pollan. The jumpers call me WC or Billy, and I live in Kalispell, Montana.
My name is Michael Rourke. I live at Lost Prairie, Montana, which is just west of Kalispell.
I jumped from 1964 to 1978.
I lived in Calgary, Alberta, Canada at the time. and just a bunch of us decided to go make a jump. And out of that group, I was the only one who really stayed with it.
It was such a passion. It was like alcoholism. It was the rush. It was the adrenaline. I mean, you wanted to do it again as soon as you landed.
I was a representative for a company up there at the time, and that's it. I quit. I'm going skydiving, and I did. And that's where I met Linda and Joni, and all the Medford gang. The whole crowd did things together. Of course, Joan and Linda had to go away and work, and the rest of us were being free and easy at the time.
Oh, Joni was a sweetheart. Everybody liked her.
The old days for us, it was a far more social activity. We used to travel together. A lot of us lived together. The house in Kalispell next to the hangars where a lot of the jumpers lived for a while. Dave, Stinky, Joni, a bunch of them all together.
It became apparent that we had outgrown Kalispell City Airport. We were flying 50 loads a weekend at times back in the 70s. The community was kind of saying, maybe because of the lifestyle of a lot of the people, that maybe we ought to find someplace else. And we flew out one day and looking at it, and we thought, well, that might work. So on the way out, we were driving down the road and we saw a for sale sign. This is 1978.
They were told to get out of the hangar. There was a hangar with a house attached to it there that everybody lived in. And the last jump meet we had in the city, we burnt it down. It was a good party.
I called the realtor about a week later, and she said, well, gosh, you know, there's some acreage here, and there's room for an airstrip. And I said, hey, where are your people? And we put this whole deal together without any money. We got a contract for deed. We had owner financing, and we were able to get this first portion of the runway, which went up to just past the hangar, free and clear, and we had the owner, Lori and Wilma Loney, encumber each and every 20. They financed it to us individually.
Pretty much everybody involved was interested or flew aircraft and was a skydiver at the time, except for Sid Torgerson, I guess.
We had 5 of us that owned the runway, and then we took in an additional partner, a fellow by the name of Sid Torgerson, that had some road building equipment and very knowledgeable, smart guy, and he came in and we gave him an ownership position to build the runway, which was a grass strip. And he did a wonderful job, and he graded this out, and we did it with minimal equipment, and it solved the mud problems, and we were kind of off and running.
You'll see in here, Joni signed the original document creating the corporation. Where is it? Right here. Articles of Incorporation.
Joni was so ambitious. She was always working. I mean, if there was a job to do, she was out there, whether it was with a shovel or hammer and nail or packing somebody's parachute. She was that kind of a person, and she was just working all the time, just an ambitious young lady.
They took all the main beams and stuff that were hauled out here by Dave and Joni, and they hauled all that lumber out here and rebuilt this place.
Joni was an optimist and always wanted to try something new. It wasn't, this is why we can't do it. This, you know, let's try it. Let's go and do something different.
They had apartments in there, so they all could be separate, you know, and they have your own, and then they had all the bottom.
Adventurous is a good term to use for Joni.
Her car would break down or something, and she'd be under there changing the tire and jacking it up and fixing it. And
Columbia Falls is about an hour drive from here, an hour, 20 minutes, but I remember Joni needed to pay her bills and so on, keep this going, didn't want to lose it. So she took a job at the aluminum plant in Columbia Falls and used to drive in the weekends. They had a, I can't remember if it's her, I think it was her motorhome. She had a little motorhome and she parked it over there and used to come out here and camp on the weekends and work on her property or skydive or whatever, and that's how she made it work.
And she'd make 3 or 4 jumps every night, or as many as she could till dark. In the evening after driving through the mud hole that we had out here at that time, it was mud all the way from here to the main road. I wish I could have got more jumps, as many jumps as she could get in, because Dave owned the airplane, so she got to jump for almost free.
The Osprey Parachute Club was Dave and Stinky, and they supplied the airplanes and kept it going. Fred got involved. He got interested, so he became a rigger, and he repaired the gear. And then everybody, in those days, everybody trained. Joan dropped students, I dropped students, Linda dropped students. We took turns flying the airplanes. It was a group effort.
Joni, she had 20 acres, and I was going to buy 10 of it at one time. About the time that I was going to say yes or no, this accident happened, so then it was over.
We were walking from that building down the grass runway, and she was up on a load about this time of the evening, and we looked up and her chute wasn't opening. Terrible memory. Bob was yelling, and I was yelling, and anyway, it didn't open, and he ran off over into where she landed, and I ran back and called 911. I don't even know if it was 911 in those days. But anyway, we called the helicopter, and they started out, and they came back and said she was dead. And so we called them off, and then somebody came in and said she was moving, and called them again. We didn't have the communications that we had nowadays, and so they came out, but she was gone. And
there were just rumors that she was using gear that she wasn't really used to, but I don't know if that was true or not. I don't know.
We were all close. I mean, it was part of the family. That it was not good.
My name is Linda Groark. My maiden name was McGinty. That's when I met Joan. And I live in Marion, Montana. Joan Carson, she was a barmaid at Mr. Smith's. And she served beer and wine, and she was a very happy person. She always had a smile. She's always in a good mood. She always said hi, even though I didn't know her. Then about a month later, after I first met her, I made my first jump, and this was in Ashland, Oregon. And come to find out, she was there too. She was making her first jump after she had broke both her wrists, so she was doing a static line too. I went out first, and I was fine, and she went out second, but the jump master broke his wrist. So we couldn't make any more jumps in Ashland, so we had to go to the Beagle Sky Ranch, which was where we continued skydiving together. We were the first 2 women, and we started the Beagle Boogie Babes because all the guys were the Beagle Boogie Boys. We even designed a patch after doing a trip down to California to skydive. We used to go out and skydive on Wednesday nights, Joan and Zimmerman and myself, and go up and practice, have fun, make 2 or 3 jumps, then go drink beer. And she had quite a few different jobs, and depending on if she had to work weekends, what days we would go out. The way it impacted me, Joni's death, was I really missed a good friend. I mean, it's like losing a star in the sky.
We wrapped up interviews in Lost Prairie and headed south to Beagle Sky Ranch in Medford, Oregon, where Joan had skydived and was given her nickname. After a 15-hour drive, we arrived and were tired and hot, but it had all been worth it. We already had a treasure trove of interviews and hoped to add to it. The Beagle Sky Ranch was started in the late 60s by George Holberton, but due to hard times, has recently shut down operations. George still lives there and dreams of getting a new plane and starting up the skydiving center again. At 68, he still jumps occasionally, so he just might do it. In any event, the spirit and legacy of the place still lives on.
My name is Deb Kalmakoff, and I live in Ashland.
My full name is Herbert A. Farber. I go by Herb. I've been called Herbie, Furby. I guess those are the ones we can say publicly.
I'm Scott Rogers. I live in Ashland. I've lived in Ashland since 1968 when I went there to go to school.
My name is George Holberton, and I dig holes for a living, so to speak. I work on construction, mostly underground work, streets, pipelines, etc.
My summers I spent at a mining town in British Columbia, and it was a very boring mining town, and everybody left for the weekends. And I would be left there with nothing to do, but I could go anywhere, and it was fine, except one summer I met somebody who was a skydiver, and he used to skydive in Kalispell. And I'd heard of Kalispell, but I'd never been there. But he just came back with great stories, and he said, I'll take you there one time, one weekend if you want. We'll go to Kalispell together. And so I went.
Beagle Sky Ranch, which is named after the old town of Beagle, which was nearby, and it long since been torn down and gone. And everything was torn down during the war. This was on the military reservation for an army fort in White City.
And I didn't let my parents know until I left. And that weekend I said, I'm going back to Kalispell and I'm going to make a jump. And my dad was excited because he jumped in the war. So he thought, oh, my brave daughter, she's taking after me.
And it became an obsession, I guess you could say, because there are people who like skydiving and those who just can't do it. I mean, it scares them. But I was one that I took to it and stayed with it for many years.
I was really kind of praying for rain, but it didn't. It was sunny all the way down, and it was a beautiful night on Friday night when we got there. And so we went to the airport and looked at the gear and looked at the airplane that we'd be jumping out of. And I went to the bar, and so I drank lots and thought, well, maybe it'll rain tomorrow. And it didn't.
Didn't have the step and the wheel to stand on. We just had a rear door, and you just kind of fell out the door, you know. So they threw me a curve on my first exit, you know. But it came out, loved it, landed, had a really crummy pair of boots on, and sprained my ankle.
So it came time to jump, and we practiced a little bit on the ground, and I was the bravest of the two of us, so I said I'd go first. And so it didn't have a door, and I remember sitting in this airplane, looking out like this, watching the ground get farther and farther away, and we went around and around. And there was another thing in Kalispell called the VOR, and it had a little beeping sound, and it's a navigational tool for airplanes. And there was this little beep, 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 Kalispell, VOR. And I could hear this over the radio all the way up, and I thought, oh my God, I can hardly breathe. Why am I doing this? And finally, we were at 3,000 feet, and it was jump, run. And I could tell the plane had slowed down. It was circling, and then it was heading straight over the airport. And it was absolutely mortifying. And Jock said, okay, get ready to put your feet out. And I put my feet out, and they were blowing in the wind. They were blowing back, and they were blowing back. And he said, okay, get closer to the door, as if I was just going to hang by a cheek and roll out, like I had trained to do. Well, it was fine when my feet could touch the floor, but when I was in the air, there was nothing holding me. And this heavy reserve parachute on the front and this heavy parachute on the back, and I was just gonna fall. And I just couldn't let go of that plane. And so I turned sideways, and my cheeks were just in this tight grip on the airplane, and he'd said, "Go!" in this British airborne voice, and I just froze. And he said it 3 times, and then he said, "Circle around again." And I thought, damn, if I'd have gone the first time, it would be over with by now. So I had to sit in the plane again and go all the way around. And then the next time he said, "Okay, get your feet out." So I put my feet out, and he said, "Get closer to the door," and I got closer to the door, and I hung about as far as I'm hanging off this chair. I was in a death grip with the airplane, and he said, "Go!" the second time, and then he said, "Go," and he pushed me with his foot and kicked me out. And I opened my eyes, and the horizon was like this, and I could hardly breathe, but I could breathe, and I noticed that the horizon got kind of level again, and then I thought, oh my God, there's something about steering this thing. Now I have to steer it. Oh my God. But I did find the airport, and I found the pea gravel, and I landed. I don't know, I could see the pea gravel from where I landed, and I lived.
Anyway, I started building a hangar and got that built, bought a mobile home, moved out here. And another fellow and I started taking turns jumping. And the regular jumping was in Ashland on Sunday. We'd go to Ashland, the wind would start blowing, and everybody'd quit. So we'd go back out here and jump. And one day everybody said, "Why don't we just stay out at your place on the weekend and jump?" And I said, "Oh, okay." And a little drop zone was born, a little backyard drop zone. And then Joni showed up, and just she's quite easygoing gal that just kind of went along, had a good time, and there was a time when she came to me and she said, "I can't seem to close when I'm supposed to." By that I mean 1 or 2 other jumpers are falling, and a third jumper or fourth, whatever, comes and makes contact with that jumper. Well, she wouldn't make that contact. She'd get up close, but she was being conservative. And I said, well, just go the other way, Joni. Be aggressive. Slam it, take it out a couple of times, crash into them and knock the thing apart, but get that contact you want. I said, from now on, we're going to call you Killer Carson. And she did. And she started closing and improved her skills, and everything was going good.
Joan was atypical at that time for a lot of women because there weren't a lot of women in skydiving. And she was one of the early pioneers, I guess you can say, into the sport.
This was a male-oriented scene out here, and it was always a treat to find women who would be skydivers, and it spiced it up, and it also made us more civilized.
The Beagle Boogie Boys and the events that we had, when we went other places, we were renowned for being a little bit loose.
The Beagle Boys was a cartoon character, Disney character, cartoon character, so that was how we kind of modeled our logo thing. In fact, I did a T-shirt design. It had the Beagle Boys from the cartoon characters, one of the Scrooge McDuck characters or something, but it put parachutes and stuff on them, so we had some T-shirts for a while.
Joni was vibrant, but she wasn't overly vibrant, and she was always up for whatever was going on and never held back, just full bore, and that was Joni.
There was a time in those days they were jumping round parachutes. You landed kind of hard with them, and she broke an ankle one day, and so they were gathering her up and putting her in the car to take her to the vet and get her fixed up. And she turned to me and she said, "George, remind me never to jump out of an airplane again." And I said, Joni, this is all you know how to do. I said, go heal up for 6 weeks and come on back. And she did. And then she even came to me and she said, you were right. That this is all I know what to do, and I really enjoy this, so I'm happy here.
Joan, I always would remember her smile. You know, she had, I think, she's an attractive woman, and she had a cute little smile that I just always remember that smile.
Armo showed up one day, and he said he had started jumping in Montana, and he wanted to jump down here. And so Steve called his friends in Montana, told them, hey, we're having a great time, come and see us. So one day they all showed up.
We drove for 2 days. It was winter, so when we got into Oregon, we came up into the high desert north of Bend, and it was blue sky and winter wheat, and it was just beautiful. It was something that I had never seen in the winter before, because I'd always lived in the Northlands. And we drove into Medford and late one night and drove to somebody's house named Joan Carson, and she had a little beige Beetle parked in the front of her duplex. And I had no idea where we were or who she was, but, and I don't even know how Fred knew her, but we stopped at Joni's first before we came into Ashland, and we partied for a little bit, and then she said, I guess we're all going to Ashland. And so we all drove, whoever was with Joni and our truck full, and showed up at Steve Armitage's house, his real name was Steve Armitage, but we all called him Armo. And so there was already a party going on there. It must have been a Friday night. And we showed up, and the party got bigger, and pretty soon we all went up to a place called the Bow Club, which was about 3 blocks away. And it was a bar where the jumpers who had come down previously spent every night. And so we went up to join them and partied and partied and partied. And the next morning, half of us woke up on Armo's floor, and some people were other places. I had no idea where. I thought, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm sure having fun.
We'd have parties here, and it would get late. I'd go to bed. At 10 o'clock in the morning, I'd get up, or before 10 probably, and I'd go out to where the bonfire was, and they were still out there partying at 10 o'clock the next morning.
We made a jump, and Joni was here too, and I just remember thinking, she's not even scared. I mean, she likes to party, she has a job, and when it's time to jump, she just gets her gear on and goes, and she doesn't go into this little apoplectic, oh my God, am I gonna do it right?
A neighbor told me his side of the story. He came back from town where he'd had a few drinks with friends, and they were a lot of them were spending the weekend here, sleeping right there in the hangar on the ground. Anyway, he returned and sat down with Joni and Linda and I think a few others, and they chatted for a while, and then finally he said, oh, you don't have clothes on. And so he removed his clothes and sat down, and they all talked. More people showed up, more people removed their clothes, till there was a pretty good crowd, and then they decided they'd go wake me up, you know, so they all came in my bedroom. Here was like 20 people naked around in my bedroom. And they were laughing and shouting, and I said, hey, you guys, quiet down, you wake the children up, you know, and so somebody said, oh, he's getting mad, we better get out. Well, they all went outside, and I thought, wonder what they're doing out there. So I started out after them, and my wife said, no, negative, you're staying in the house. Those people are naked.
There's a restaurant in Medford called Kim's, and we had a few parties out there. And I remember a group of them, I think it was the Kalispell group in particular, that would moon us, the other side of the room, you know, in the restaurant.
Mostly just talked and laughed and told jokes, had a few drinks, and just were together. I guess that was it. It was the togetherness of the group.
You know, Joni was just lighthearted in everything that she did. She worked hard, she had a job, and she had money to spend jumping, and she just did what she wanted to do. There was a jump meet in Pope Valley that she and I decided we would go to. And it was, I don't remember much about it except that Joni she'd had a little Beetle Volkswagen, and she sold it to buy this very cool van, a Volkswagen van. And she drove it down to Pope Valley. Pope Valley is in Northern California, up in the Napa Valley, a little bit north of the Napa Valley. And I thought, man, she is just so brave. And she just took off for Pope Valley by herself. And another friend and I drove down and met her there and hung out together. And it was really fun. I thought, man, I could be at home teaching, or here I am in California and it's warm and it's only May. This is the life.
I think a drop zone owner would dream about having 100 Jonies on his drop zone, because they just came out, they skydived, and they were friendly, and they were good to everybody else, and they helped any person they could. They'd jump right in and help them.
You know, when I arrived, she didn't have any boyfriends. I mean, that wasn't an issue. She just was a jumper. She was a friend with everybody at the drop zone. And I liked that because that's what I was too. I was kind of like their sister.
I think Joan was the first, and it was sad, you know, and got the word, you know. I'm not even sure how I heard about it, other than just the buzz on the drop zone, you know, but everybody was affected.
I do remember Fred calling us to say that Joni had gone in, and we were working on a little concrete border in our yard. I still remember where exactly we were when the phone rang, and we went running in, and it was Fred, and it was just like, the spark just left. It was like, poof. Rodney flew us in a rented plane, and we went with Tim and Peg and Armo and I and Rodney in the plane, and we flew through a thunderstorm like I have never in my life flown through before. And I thought, if we're going through a funeral, we're probably not going to die because somebody has already died.
When you lose anybody that's close in a family, you know, it's tragedy. And there was a period there in a 3 or 4 year span where we lost a number of our friends, and it's difficult every time, and it's never easy.
I heard her sister talking to someone and was amazed at the remarkable similarity between their voices. I thought, oh, this is so sad. I can hear her, but she's dead. It was terrible. It was the first friend that I'd lost. It was hard.
I don't remember a lot about that weekend other than that we paid tribute to Joni, and because everyone had a lot of respect for her.
We got wild and crazy that weekend. I remember mooning I think there were 11 of us mooned up against one of the bars on the lake outside of the drop zone that we always drank at. And we leaned up against the windows, and I thought, oh my God, this is gonna be such a mess if something breaks here, because there's gonna be, all of us are gonna have glass shards in our asses. It's gonna be so awful. Nothing broke. We just partied and tried to cheer up. My last jump was November that year. I think, yeah, because Joni went in Memorial Day, and then another friend went in Labor Day, and another friend went in on Thanksgiving weekend.
I think to start another drop zone, you'd have to have people with a personality like Joan Carson that would give people an opportunity to see normal people jumping. And probably a lot of people have an idea in their mind of what jumpers are like, and some of them are a little crazy. We can't be our own worst enemy.
I went back 10 years later to Kalispell, and the smells revived me, and the students' training revived me, and somehow the music, and I just decided that I had to make one more jump. So I did, with my good friends from Kalispell. It was very exhilarating. It was probably one of the most fun jumps I'd ever made. I wasn't scared, and Fred and Lanny and Garfield were on the load, and I thought, oh, my brothers are with me, I'll be fine. And I was. I couldn't even walk. I was so full of adrenaline when I landed. It was crazy.
We concluded interviews at Beagle Sky Ranch and were sad to leave, but we had an interview the following day in San Francisco. When we arrived in San Francisco, I was concerned. Sure, we had met some wonderful people and been granted some incredible interviews back in Medford, but I still didn't understand what had driven Joan to take the risk she had taken and why she was a skydiver. It looked like the answer might elude me, as it had for 29 years. But I had come this far, so I couldn't just quit. I couldn't just leave things dangling. I needed to know more than ever. It seemed fitting to return to the city Joan had loved and where I had spent time with her 37 years earlier. A brief but intense moment, which would forever be etched in my memory. I spent the following morning retracing the footsteps Joan and I had taken so many years earlier. That afternoon, we arrived at a business park in Fremont to interview Joan's brother, which would then lead us to interview Joan's sister and several other people.
I'm Barry Carson, and I am in software sales, and I live in Los Gatos, California.
Janet Bequette, and I live in Sammamish. I have a Montessori school that I've had for 31 years.
I'm Mike Klinke. I live in Seattle, Washington.
My name is Sharon Towsey. I live in Kalispell, Montana.
We're six of us, and I have an older brother, so he's the oldest, and then it's Janet, Joan, and then me, so I'm the baby of the family.
Joan was closer to Barry. They were the two youngest. Bob was much older, and I was only 18 months younger than Bob, but he was in his own world. He was the tough big brother. So they didn't have a real close relationship. They knew each other, but like I said, it was pretty distant.
My parents moved to Redmond in 1962. And for me, that was the place I lived. I went to Redmond Elementary School, junior high, and high school. But prior to that, my family had moved almost every year. So my brothers and sisters really had a life up to that point of moving and changing schools almost every year, and sometimes twice a year.
My parents were a little bit distant, so all of us were distant from my parents. My thoughts on that are that we moved so many times, I felt like all we ever did was pack and move. So I think that they were just mainly trying to adjust to every place we lived and all the things that we did.
The thing I remember about my sister that sticks with me the most is she was always very creative. And she was always looking for a way to express herself. So she danced, and she was a good dancer. She loved to do art. So she drew, she painted, played music a little bit. So she was always looking for an expression. And that's kind of the one thing I really remember about my sister growing up is she was always kind of the artistic one in the family. And never really developed it or took it anywhere, but to me it kind of reflected her personality, that need to express.
The other thing she liked to do, she went up skiing, so she skied with us. She was adventuresome, but she was actually a little more shy about stepping out and stepping in to do things. That kind of came with time and experience. And it came with getting away from our family and just being on her own. So through high school, I think she was a little more conservative than she was later on.
She was always kind of quiet in the family. That was kind of her role in the family, but I don't think that was really who she was.
Joan was somebody who liked to try different things. When Joan was in junior high, she was on cheer squad, and she continued that through high school. I don't recall her enjoying it really a lot when she got to high school, but she just kept doing it because that was what she did.
So Joan got pregnant when she was 18 and had a child. And she gave that child up for adoption.
She relied on our parents for a little bit of support through that. She didn't live at home during her pregnancy. She lived with a couple in Seattle. I think it was a very difficult time in her development. This was a time where she was struggling. She had a hard time figuring out what she wanted to do. I think there was a part of her that really wanted to keep the baby, But my parents weren't as pro that. They were more into image. And if you know Joan, Joan wasn't into image at all.
So I think at that point, she just wanted to leave and, you know, go find herself a little bit, because she had not really found happiness at home. She got pregnant, had to give up her daughter, and didn't really have a lot of support through that from her parents. Pretty disapproving. So I think for her, she might have had that instinct or that desire to move on anyway and go find herself, and maybe part of that would have been moving, and who knows. And at the time, it was 69, 1970, and a lot of stuff was going on. It was a time of change, revolution, questioning, protest, and that was just part of that environment to, you know, and she would decide to go to San Francisco. But it was very much, I think, about her leaving the pain of that and wanting to find herself.
The hard part for her when she got pregnant is when she delivered the baby. They actually made the mistake of handing her the baby, and so she held her daughter. So once Joan held her daughter, it was very hard for her to hand that, you know, precious little package over to somebody else, but she did. I think she always had some regrets. It was very difficult for her to talk about it. She didn't talk about it a lot. But I remember one time Joan did tell me that she was sad, and she always thought of her daughter.
When I visited Joan, she was actually living on Green Street in San Francisco and working at a pharmacy in Chinatown. So I don't think she was doing anything other than paying the rent. I mean, she was not career motivated. She was out just trying to find herself, and it wasn't about a profession for her. It wasn't about education. It was about finding her place in life.
Joan said that when she was up in the air, everything that mattered was right there with her. She didn't think about her problems. She didn't think about the earth. All she could think about was how beautiful it was and how freeing it was to be up there.
So I never saw Joan as depressed. She might have been, but to me, she was always off to the next adventure, you know, kind of full of life. She's always, you know, enthusiastic about what she was doing. But having said that, there was a certain sense of trying to find something. It wasn't all there for her, but it was not, it didn't come from depression or sadness. It just came from a drive almost to go find what she wanted to do in life.
Do you think she found it?
Oh, absolutely.
Where did she find that?
Yeah, Joan found her home. She found it in Kalispell. She found her tribe. It was the people, the experience. Absolutely, she found her home.
I think for Joan, the impression I got for the big connection between Dave and Joan was that it dealt with flying, and it dealt with skydiving, and it dealt with the airport. I never heard anything beyond that.
A year prior to Joan's death, she and Dave were on rocky times. Things had gotten so bad between Dave and Joan that Nancy had offered to let her come in and get away from Dave, that they needed this time apart, and that she had offered up that space. And I would have to say most of us thought that would be a good idea, that Joan needed space away from Dave.
He was fairly clear that they were still together when she died, and I found out later they weren't together when she died. I don't know what created the split between Joan and Dave. I just know that there was a split before.
I think there might have been another woman involved, but she never really talked about it. And I just know that there was something that was another involvement there.
It was very hard for me to listen to Dave talk about Joan. But it was harder for me to hear that there had been a split before. And the impression that I got was that they were together. And so that was hard for me, because I wasn't sure then what was legitimately true about what he was telling me.
Well, she never did really talk about any of her personal life, skydiving or any personal thing. And the only time that she ever said anything derogatory, I guess, against Dave is that she said, I'm taking him off of my life insurance policy at work. And she did.
I had to clean up. I had her blood on my face from doing this CPR. The sheriff needed to contact her parents, and her boyfriend, Dave, was not up to the task of talking with them, so I broke the news to her father.
My dad wanted to go around and find out if there was a reason why didn't the chute open, because somebody else had packed it and something else was, neither chute opened. And the FAA didn't find anything. They found nothing wrong with how it was packed, what happened. They just said it was just that, an accident.
We were very concerned about Dave at that point. He was very despondent over the death of Joan. And we had questioned the wisdom about having him come up and jump with us on that particular load. But Dave has a strong love of life, so our fears were unfounded.
Once Dave he had processed everything about Joan's death, he disappeared. He was like the vanishing man.
No, I don't think Joan's death taught me that skydiving is something to avoid. Everything in life has risks. Skydiving has risks. Going to the grocery store has risks. The question is how do you live your life, and what's the value to you of what you do, and what are you passionate about? And there are things in life that are risky, and the alternative is to live a safe life. And I think that's not living. I don't think Joan for a second ever took a safe path in her life, ever. And that's one of the things that made her unique. I think that's one of the things that people were drawn to with Joan is that she lived life that way. People saw that. That's a very attractive thing, that is. It's very powerful. I think people are drawn to people who are passionate and connected with what drives them. People want to be around that, It's very, very magnetic in a way. I think that's where Joan was. I think that was a real strong part of her personality. Yeah.
What I can remember of Joan's ceremony is limited because of the emotional impact it had, and because I was still thinking it wasn't true. And because they had her body cremated, there was it created the idea that it wasn't real.
When I jumped in Kalispell when I was visiting Joan, I spent a few nights, late nights after a few beers, talking to people, trying to understand this thing called skydiving. And it never made sense to me, because I did it. Loved it at one level, feared it mostly though. And I wanted to understand what drove people to continue to do it. And I don't think there's any one thing that anybody said, but what I walked away with from those conversations was kind of a view of life that the divers were willing to roll the dice every time they got on an airplane, you know, and that's how they live their life, you know. And I think you could look at that and think it was almost a death wish, like you had a death wish. And I think for me, I ended up understanding it as a life wish. That if you're so passionate about what you do, that you're willing to risk everything for it, you definitely live in life to the fullest. So, yeah.
When I learned that Joan had a daughter, it answered so many of my questions. It explained why Joan had moved to San Francisco, the reasons she had possibly taken up skydiving, and why she kept doing it in spite of suffering injuries. It explained Medford and Montana, and what she was ultimately searching for. It all made sense to me now. From time to time, though, I wondered about Joan's daughter. Was she looking for Joan? Would she hear about Ride the Sky? If so, would she contact me? About a year after Ride the Sky made its premiere at a film festival near Kalispell, I received an email from a person named Dina McDonald, claiming to be Joan's daughter. Because of a new law, Dina had just received a copy of her original birth certificate that she had previously been unable to obtain. Her birth mother's maiden name was listed as Joan Margaret Carson from Redmond, Washington. Later that day, she read newspaper articles online about Ride the Sky, learning of Joan's death, and decided to contact me. In the matter of one day, Dina had found her birth mother, only to lose her again. However, through her loss, she gained a new extended family. As for me, my quest is now complete.
When she was living in San Francisco and skydiving in Hope Valley, she used to take her gear out there on a motorcycle.
Joan moved her little trailer into my yard and was here for about a year before she passed away.
And we had different names for the mooning, double hogback growler, double inverts, the rolling train, and probably the epitome of it was the dance of the flaming assholes, which was introduced to me at least by Jock. And this consisted of stripping down naked and trailing a tail of toilet paper out between your butt cheeks and setting it on fire and dancing wildly through the middle of the crowd. It was a sure crowd pleaser.
She was really heartbroken because she had given her whole self into her relationship with Dave. I really do. I mean, she's just the kind of person that would give all of herself to whoever and whatever she was going to do, she gave it.
She had, I think it was an 8-track tape player back in the day, and she had installed it herself. And she was so proud of that. There was one little hitch to it. When you turned it on, the lights came on.
But the song goes, suck, mother, eat a bag of snot. 69 douchebags tied in a knot. Root hang, gangbang, nibble gobble chew. We're the Beagle Boogie Boys. Who the are you? And that was the song. And people would go, holy cow, where are these guys coming from, right? Well, we came up here and sang it to the Montana guys. And the next year, they show up and all of a sudden they're screaming, Ospreys are ospreys when beagles were a pup, and ospreys are ospreys and beagles all And if you beagle sons of bitches don't like our osprey sass, you can pucker up your beagle lips and kiss our osprey ass. Of course, the war is on, right?